Hi everyone, welcome back to the Aspect Health channel. I am your host Alicia. I am with our Chief Medical Officer here, Dr. Faris, who will be talking to us all about nutrition for PCOS. So Dr. Faris, as always, thank you for being with us here today. How are you doing?
I'm well, Alicia. How are you?
Good. I'm really curious about today's topic as much as our followers who told us on Instagram when we did the poll, this was one of the topics that they were most interested in. So I think we're going to find out so much today. I'm excited to just get right to it, decode what nutrition should we be having for PCOS, especially since it's National Nutrition Month, for those of you that don't know, in March. So it's very on topic and on theme. Let me introduce for you guys Dr. Faris if you're new to the Aspect community. If you haven't heard of Dr. Faris before, she is the perfect expert for this conversation. Dr. Faris is a practicing OBGYN with over 20 years of experience helping people manage PCOS. But what makes her truly stand out is also her background as a former registered dietitian and a culinary medicine specialist. So this combination of both medical expertise and her deep nutritional knowledge makes her the ideal person to break down the connection between PCOS and the power of nutrition. So my first question for Dr. Faris here today, with your extensive experience in helping people with PCOS, when you first started your journey as an OBGYN, how clear was it for you that connection between nutrition and PCOS? Was it something that was widely recognized, or did that correlation kind of evolve over time?
That's a really great question. And, you and I have spoken in the past a little bit about my professional journey. And, to me, I saw it, right?
Yeah.
Because I, in my work as a registered dietitian, saw people with PCOS. And when you can see the big picture and you can see that people with PCOS so many times either have a family history of diabetes, they're struggling with weight, maybe they had gestational diabetes, just starting to put those patterns together. By the time I sort of went through medical school and residency and started practicing, we did actually have more evidence that insulin resistance and PCOS were connected. And so even though I'm still, sort of surprised to find that there are people that don't really understand that connection, it was sort of apparent there for me. Certainly certain lab abnormalities that we were seeing again and again. And I think that's what draws me to PCOS care, is because I feel like I'm almost like I have an obligation because of my knowledge that I should be doing something.
I want to start with chapter 1, which is discussing how PCOS affects your metabolism and how we know that the majority of people with PCOS also suffer with insulin resistance. So what does that mean for your metabolism and PCOS symptoms?
Yeah, so it's a great place to start. Many people have insulin resistance in the United States and around the world, but insulin resistance doesn't just mean one thing. So just in a nutshell, insulin is a hormone that's made by our pancreas, right? It's crucial to our metabolism. It signals our cells that there's fuel available for uptake into the cells for its utilization. It also has some other functions, which are to tell the cells that they need to grow and divide and produce whatever products that particular cell is supposed to produce, right? Each cell has different roles in our body. In order for insulin to signal the cell to do what it's supposed to do, uptake fuel, produce its particular products, divide and grow, there's the insulin molecule itself, and it binds to an insulin receptor, right? And the receptor is on the surface of the cell. It's in the cell membrane. Okay. And so in order for insulin to tell the cell what to do, it has to bind to the receptor. You can have problems in that process, the insulin and the insulin receptor. So you could have defects in the insulin receptor where insulin binds to it. Maybe some people have fewer insulin receptors, or in the case of the majority of people with PCOS, there is actually a specific defect which really only impacts the message or the ability for insulin to signal metabolism in the cell, okay? And what I mean by that is insulin tells the cell, open up and allow glucose into the cell, and then produce energy from it, right? That's its metabolic function in the cell.
Right.
And the defect in people with PCOS is in that message to say, hey, take up the glucose and actually produce energy from it.
So in the case of insulin resistance and PCOS, in this infographic, we see GLUT4 with this X on it. Could you walk us through what's going on here and just this infographic?
Yeah. So what we see here is a cell membrane, right? We see a cell membrane and it has the insulin receptor. We see insulin binding to the insulin receptor. And then we essentially see the receptor fork. Okay. And that bifurcation or that fork is really indicating that the insulin receptor has these two different functions. And one is the metabolic pathway, which I described, right? Signaling glucose to enter the cell and be utilized for energy. And the other one is called the mitogenic pathway. And mitogenic means the cell's going to undergo cell division. It's going to divide, it's going to grow, and it's also going to produce its products. Whatever that cell's job is, it's going to produce those products. GLUT4 is one of many glucose transporters or gates that are present in different cells. And GLUT4 is present in our muscle cells. It's present in our ovary cells. It's present in the majority of cells and in fat cells. And its job is to open up and allow glucose to enter the cell, because otherwise the glucose stays in the bloodstream. When insulin binds to the insulin receptor, it actually tells these GLUT4 receptors, these GLUT4 channels, to go from inside the cell, floating around, actually to incorporate themselves into the cell membrane. And that is what allows glucose to enter. And what is impaired in people with PCOS is that this process of incorporating those GLUT4s into the cell membrane is impaired. So then these gates are just not there. It's just a barrier. That's the particular problem in people with PCOS. So the insulin receptors are there, but that part of the message is not being sent. This impairment in this message could be present in every cell where there's an insulin receptor, or maybe it's just present in some cell, right? In some organs. And so that also explains how maybe some people have more severe symptoms than other people, because maybe this defect in insulin signaling is only present in certain cells and not other cells. I say this all the time, like, we have to figure out what's your flavor or your brand of PCOS, because each person's is different. But at the crux of it is that insulin signaling problem. And that leads to a lot of different issues that we're going to talk about and how we can sort of mitigate that with nutrition.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I like the term of like imagining it as a gate. I think that helps me to visualize it. Like, it's easy to see, okay, it's not getting in. I guess two things happen. The blood sugar remains high.
Yeah. So a few things happen, right? So the energy doesn't get into the cell. So if this is your muscle cell, you don't have the energy that you need, and you can't move as well, and you don't have energy, right?
Yeah.
If this is your brain, then less energy for your brain to function, right? Be sharp. And then the glucose stays high in the blood. That blood with the glucose in it circles back to the pancreas, and the pancreas responds by producing more insulin. It's important to understand that this process isn't prevented completely. It's just slowed. Okay, glucose will still enter the cell, but just at a slower rate than is optimal.
Could you walk us through a scenario, like what's happening to your body with somebody who has PCOS and insulin resistance when they eat something, and perhaps for each scenario, like the effects on it?
Imagine a scenario in which you eat a very large sandwich with a large piece of bread. That bread is going to get digested very quickly, and it's a lot of it. So now you're going to have a higher load of glucose entering your bloodstream. The blood glucose is going to go up. Insulin is going to be released in proportion to the amount of glucose that is in your bloodstream now, okay? And then gradually that insulin will signal the glucose to enter the cell, and it'll start to go down. A few different things can happen with your blood glucose, sort of depending on the scenario. You can have a very, very big peak, and it may stay high for a little bit. And then because your pancreas has put out a large amount of insulin, because it senses that that blood glucose is still hanging around, it will fall, right? And sometimes it'll fall really quickly depending on how much insulin is produced. So if it's a proportionate amount of insulin, then it'll gradually go back to normal within 2 hours or so. If it's an overshoot on the insulin, it might drop really quickly. So we see this sort of big rise and big fall. It's not ideal. So let's say you swapped that bread, right, for a higher fiber bread. Instead of white bread, you choose a whole grain bread. It may even have the same amount of glucose. But what's going to happen is your stomach and intestines will digest it more slowly. And now the blood glucose is going to enter your bloodstream more slowly. So the pancreas is going to sense a smaller amount of glucose and release less insulin. And so that smaller amount of insulin is going to actually slow down the absorption of the glucose, maybe slightly, but that insulin gets to be reused again and again. And so it allows a more gradual trickle of energy into your cell. The pancreas is not going to have to release more insulin because your glucose is not going to get as high in the first place. So it's going to continue to allow the glucose to enter the cell more slowly, and we'll see more of a gradual rise and a gradual fall, even though the overall amount of carbohydrate might be the same. It doesn't mean we have to eliminate carbs completely. It just means we have to strategize. You can slow digestion also by adding a small amount of a healthy fat into that. So let's say instead of just turkey, which is very low fat, and the bread, now you add a little bit of avocado in there. The idea isn't to be as restrictive as possible or as low as possible. I see some companies out there and their CGM apps that they use, and they really are advocating for like as low number as possible. There are also problems with that as well. That's not the strategy that we're going for. We're not trying to just be as to see how low can you go.
Right.
And we're not necessarily advocating that people eliminate all carbohydrates either, because you need carbohydrates, right? Your cells need energy.
Right. I think hearing about these all different strategies that someone can do makes me realize just how extreme it is to cut out like carbs as a whole. And I think, of course, in the topic about PCOS, we hear a lot of that sort of advice being given. I don't know if it's fair to say myths or kind of this misinformation that if you have PCOS, you should avoid dairy, you should avoid gluten. What are your thoughts about this type of extreme advice from your perspective?
I always call that lazy advice, because you could give the same advice to a large group of people and it's going to benefit some of them, right? So what happens when you eliminate dairy and gluten just as a blanket recommendation? Chances are there's some people in that group who have lactose intolerance that didn't know it that are going to feel a lot better, right? There's some people that either had celiac or non-celiac insensitivity. They're going to feel a lot better because they didn't know that they had this sensitivity. But what else do a lot of these foods have that people are going to eliminate in the process? They're going to eliminate probably a lot of low fiber or refined carbohydrates, right? Because if somebody goes gluten-free, they're going to eliminate a lot of bread probably, right? You're not going to eat bread. You're not going to eat pizza, which has both dairy and gluten in it. So you're going to eliminate a lot of foods that are going to also probably lower your refined carbohydrate intake at the same time. And so certainly that is going to improve your PCOS health. But does that mean everybody needs to then go gluten-free and dairy-free? No, it doesn't, because there's some people that tolerate dairy. There's some people that tolerate, maybe are lactose intolerant, but they tolerate fermented dairy because fermented dairy, like yogurt, is naturally low in lactose. The live cultures in the yogurt digest the lactose. And so some people can't tolerate milk or can't tolerate mozzarella cheese, which is a non-aged cheese. Like it's in pizza, it's in mozzarella sticks, right? It's in a lot of like fast food, but they can tolerate fermented dairy just fine. And so in that regards, they're actually eliminating a source of live active cultures that may be helping their gut microbiome, right? And the same thing goes for gluten. If you're not substituting it with like a low fiber carbohydrate, now you've sort of just eliminated a lot of low fiber carbs, because now you're not eating pretzels, and now you're not eating pizza, and now you're not eating a lot of these lower fiber carbs. And that's lazy advice. And I think people should figure out for themselves what they're sensitive to. So it doesn't make sense to eliminate a food that we don't know somebody is sensitive to, but yet they are sensitive to something else. Maybe somebody has food sensitivities to soy, and now they're switching all of their dairy to all of these soy-based products. and not realizing they're actually harming themselves further, when they tolerated dairy to begin with. There's no one size fits all. We all have different things that we can eat and not eat. And so we should try to figure that out for ourselves.
That brings me on to this fun little activity I have. If you were to go into a supermarket, a grocery store, and you had to shop for somebody with PCOS, what are some of the items that you would be putting into your cart that are like your must-haves for somebody with PCOS?
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had my list up. I have a really good grocery list. It's one of the sort of like old strategies of trying to shop the perimeter of the grocery stores. You barely need to go into the aisles in the supermarket. Most of what you need, you really find around the perimeter of the supermarket. So usually it's the produce section first, making sure you get produce, fruits and vegetables that are fresh and in season and within your budget. There are even some, higher fiber carbs that you can find, right, as good sides in this fresh section. So I'm talking about, potatoes, sweet potatoes. Those can be great additions to your meal that are higher in fiber, sort of going around the perimeter, the protein section, the meat section, if you are a meat eater. Dairy, if you eat dairy alternatives. And then you're really only venturing into the aisles to replenish any of your staples, right? So you should always have some foods on hand in your cupboard, in your freezer, that in a pinch you can still make a good healthy meal. So things like beans, dry or canned beans, great. I think probably most people, and I always think that's like a magical food for people with PCOS. It has plant proteins, it has great healthy fibers that help that help you with that sustained energy. They have fibers that your gut bacteria love, so you have a healthy gut microbiome. And so I think that's a really great thing to have on hand. And then walking down the frozen foods aisle to get some frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables are picked and frozen shortly after they're picked, so they really maintain their nutritional value. And so if you live in an area where there's not a great selection of fresh produce, if you live in a region that, you're just not getting good seasonal produce, like in the middle of the winter, frozen is a really great option. I always have some frozen vegetables so I can make a well-balanced, healthy meal, even if I haven't been to the supermarket in 2 weeks.
How important is gut health for PCOS and just the connection between those two?
This sort of gut microbiome health, we're still I think really in our infancy of our understanding of the importance. I think we all acknowledge that it's important to have a good, healthy gut microbiome. We're understanding how different patterns, different species of bacteria, how that impacts your health positively and negatively. What we do know about the gut microbiome and PCOS is that people with PCOS compared to those without generally have fewer bacteria in their gut microbiome and less diverse populations. And so a healthy gut microbiome is one that mostly lives in your large intestine. You shouldn't have too much growing in your small intestine. So your large intestine is also called the colon, right? That's where most of these bacteria live. They have a lot of different roles, and they produce different byproducts. They digest fiber. They digest the food that we don't digest. And they produce all these different incredible byproducts as a result that our body recognizes and uses, and also sends signals to the rest of our body, sort of inflammatory and anti-inflammatory signals. So if you have sort of the right population of bacteria in your intestines, they're going to help you. They're going to help keep your intestinal lining healthy. They're going to help reduce the amount of inflammatory chemicals that enter your bloodstream, and that can really be beneficial to your health. There are many tests out there that can test your gut microbiome and tell you what species are living in your intestines. The problem with that is we don't know specifically how to improve it. So knowing that you have this species and that species and you have this number, is nice to know, but we can't be like, oh, you should take this particular probiotic supplement or eat this specific combination of foods to make it better. But that doesn't mean that we can't do some things to help support a healthy gut microbiome. And so those things are getting enough fiber, I'm going to say it again and again and again, right? It's the answer to many, many problems. If you're somebody that really has a low fiber diet, you want to gradually increase your fiber intake. You don't want to do it overnight. It's going to be very uncomfortable, very gassy, could cause some abdominal pain, but gradually start to increase more fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grain foods into your diet. And then also consume fermented foods. You can consume probiotic supplements. There's nothing wrong with them. I think different probiotics have different strains, and some of them are actually are going to be killed off by stomach acid and your digestive enzymes. So how much are going to actually make it all the way through to your large intestines is yet to be seen. I'm sure certain supplements are better than others, but actually consuming foods that contain the milk-led cultures has been shown to be probably more beneficial. And so these are fermented foods. These are things like yogurt and other fermented dairy and other foods like real sauerkraut, like real fermented pickles, kimchi, fermented beverages like kombucha. These are things that contain live active cultures, and they have a higher chance of actually making it intact into your large intestines where that would grow and thrive and hopefully help your body.
Speaking of kind of this personalized solutions, I would love to talk a little bit about aspect health as we're transitioning towards the end of our video. So we talked to you guys about how important nutrition is for PCOS, how each of us will require different things. And one of the best ways to do this is you can play around with a continuous glucose monitor. So this tiny wearable tracks your blood sugar levels 24/7, so you can see how different foods and in what amounts affect your blood sugar levels in real time. With Aspect's PCOS program, you will also be paired with your own personal health coach. Our health coaches are experts in nutrition and have a lot of experience in the PCOS space, so they will explain to you your data and suggest small, manageable changes that fit your lifestyle seamlessly, that will help you also achieve your health goals without it feeling so restrictive. You can learn insights about your body that will serve you a lifetime and just ditch this lazy one-size-fits-all advice. We have a free PCOS quiz in the description where you can get started and get your personalized plan today. So at the end of this video, if you feel like this is a type of solution you've been looking for, then just check that place out. Our last segment of this video is questions. So we have a few questions left by users relating to nutrition and PCOS. And one of those were, can intermittent fasting be beneficial for PCOS, or does it do more harm than good?
That is a great question, because that is recommended. I know that's something that's recommended to many, many people. Intermittent fasting, or what really I think most people do, is what's called time-restricted feeding, where they have a window of eating throughout the day, whether it be 8 hours or 6 hours, and the remainder of that time is not eating. And can be a useful strategy for people to, especially if people are on a weight loss journey, to create a small energy deficit. Now, that being said, it needs to be well thought out. It needs to be planned so that you make sure that within that eating window, you're getting all of your nutritional needs met. What can be challenging, and this is also where a continuous glucose monitor can be helpful, is each person, their fasting window may need to be adjusted, especially at the beginning of your journey. If you have high circulating levels of insulin, if you have more profound insulin resistance, that really may make it difficult for you to go a longer period of time without eating. And as you improve, as you make changes that sort of improve your insulin sensitivity, you may be able to go longer and longer. But what I fear, especially when somebody first starts, is that as they get later and later in their fast time, that they may have dips in their blood sugar that then the body has to respond to by producing what we call the counter-regulatory hormones, which are glucagon and cortisol, to help bring the blood glucose back up to normal. In doing so, that actually may make some PCOS symptoms worse, especially for people who suffer with a lot of androgenetic symptoms, so the facial hair and the cystic acne. And so, and I see it, and I've seen people do it. They really think that they need to go really restrictive, and they fast, and I'll see their blood sugar sort of graphs, and they'll sort of dip down in the morning prior to eating, and then it sort of jumps up without their blood glucose rises without them even eating anything. And that to me is a sign that their fast is too long.
How can people with PCOS approach weight management without falling into restrictive or harmful dieting patterns?
A few things need to happen. You need to sort of work on your insulin sensitivity. So if you have insulin resistance, it does make it, I know people will debate this, it does make it harder to lose weight for various different reasons. It decreases the amount of energy you utilize if you have insulin resistance, right? If your glucose is staying higher than it should and the glucose isn't entering the cells, you're not utilizing that energy. So that's number one. And also having insulin resistance and these big sort of fluctuations in blood glucose can drive your hunger. So really sort of utilizing strategies to help to mitigate that is important. And there's no getting around. You have to have a small energy deficit, a small caloric deficit, which means you are expending more than you are intaking. What I think a lot of people try to do is they try to really go real hard in the gym and see how many calories they can burn in the gym. I think instead of that, people should try to focus on what we call the NEAT, or non-exercise energy thermogenesis. And that's just sort of increasing your movement throughout the day, walking a little bit more, standing more, just trying to incorporate more movement into everyday activities. You'll actually end up probably utilizing more energy in the long run. Parking your car further away, taking the stairs instead of taking the elevator. All of these little choices add up throughout the day, and that may actually be a better strategy than just trying to figure out, can you get it, like burn an extra 50 calories on the treadmill or on the spin bike.
That was actually the last question that we had. So thank you guys if you have come this far to the video. Again, the link to the PCOS quiz is in the description if you wish to check out and start a personalized plan with Aspect. So Dr. Bosma, thank you again for being with us here today and teaching us as always. So subscribe, like, and we'll see you guys in the next video.
Thanks.